We spend so much time acquiring talent, and it is expensive. Turnover is expensive.
One thing that you can't teach is that willingness to learn and that willingness to be successful.
We end up having 30-minute one-on-one conversations with people in the organizations.
And when an employee is in that situation, I feel like they're often more engaged. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Talent Talk. I'm your host, Rick Martin from Ready to Hire, and I'm joined here today by Nick Montalbine, who is the founder of Intervoice Analytics. Nick, how are you?
I'm doing well, Rick. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Good to see you again. So if you would, for the audience, just tell us a little bit about what you do or why you founded Intervoice. And then if you could just kind of dive into your career journey a little bit for us.
Yeah, sure. So at Intervoice Analytics, super high level, we're a continuous employee listening organization. So one of the things that we like to do is we like to go ahead and help organizations really dig down deep into the organization and really surface those truths that might not be coming in through your traditional engagement surveys or surveys in general. The other thing that we're seeing is that employee sentiment changes very rapidly, and we want to be that neutral third party that is able to capture that before employee disengagement turns into turnover. So high level, we like to go ahead and go supplement that quantitative data you're gathering with all those metrics and try to bring in that qualitative insights to it. But before starting up Intervoice Analytics, I spent close to 10 years at Nike, where I led strategy, innovation, and talent, specifically focused on their digital and retail organizations. Had a great time at Nike, wonderful brand. Felt like it was time to move on. So in 2022, I went into the world of executive coaching with a local firm here in Portland, Oregon, where I coached C-suite executives, working with their leadership teams as well, trying to get them functioning really, like a well-oiled machine. This way organizations would benefit from that underneath them, spending time developing leadership frameworks, values, things of that nature. Then I had a wonderful opportunity come my way to go ahead and go do a startup within a hospital system here in Portland, Oregon. Launching talent planning and people analytics. So think around succession planning, identifying talent in an organization. And on that analytics side, how do we take all this complex data and make it really real, easy to digest for leaders? This way they can make decisions on the snap of a finger.
Great. Well, thanks for that introduction. And I think that, that when you and I had first met, we had some conversations about, the new company that you started and kind of calling upon those prior experiences with Nike and just some of the other opportunities you've had. And I think it's kind of a good segue to one of the topics that I'd like to get into today. And that would be, and you mentioned it, kind of like this succession planning. And so to kind of set it up, how do you, if you're thinking about succession planning from a senior manager or from like an HR sort of, level of view, what are some of the things that stand out to you most as far as a solid succession plan?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think looking at succession planning as a way to risk proof your organization. I think to me, it's a business continuity strategy, right? The last thing that you want to have is a leader leave unexpectedly, and then you're going to go ahead and go scramble and try to figure out who's next, right? And the other part of succession planning, it's such a great intentional way to develop people in the organization and build this great bench of talent that when vacancies do happen, it's like, we already know that we're going to go ahead and go tap Rick for this position. All right. And what that also does is send such a strong signal to the organization that, look, we got this. Like we're on top of this. Don't worry about it. And I think that's what employees want to go ahead and go feel. I think the other piece that I find with strong succession planning is organizations that are super dialed in terms of what roles are critical in their organizations and what one may not be as critical is also is a wonderful way to go ahead and go at least start. So a quick example that I'll give, if I'm running a hospital, I know I need a chief medical officer. I know I need a chief nursing officer. Do I really need that VP of talent management? Yeah, it's nice to have, but I need to have those two things because that can at least start to narrow down what are those critical roles in the organization that if somebody were to depart, we need to have somebody in there like right away, right? And if you have those gaps, it's a buy build conversation.
Yep. Yeah. And I've had those conversations on other episodes with Talent Talk about that same concept of, the buy build, even just, and some people say like, where do I start? And what's the best way to kind of dip my toes into this like succession planning? And I think you said it best, just actually starting is the first step. Just getting a plan in place is often the hardest thing to do if you can't get your mind into the forward movement mentality of like, let's just get something down and on paper and let's just start the process. And so, I have a lot of conversations, and what I find is that there's still this sense of people being very reactive to the labor market and being very reactive to people leaving or talent gaps or, pipeline shortages. So sort of like to that point, I guess you could say that by this succession planning, it sort of future-proof your workforce in some ways.
Yeah, 100%, right? So, I mean, it can have that cascade effect. So a quick example, let's just say that we have a vice president of finance, right? That we deem as a critical role in the organization, right? That's where that succession plan starts to figure out like who in our organization now is ready to go ahead and go potentially be that in that ready now, ready 1 to 2 years, ready 3 to 5 year concept. And hopefully out of that dialogue, you start to find 1 or 2 candidates that maybe could step into that role. But now I think that cascade effect starts to happen, right? Where it's like, all right, well, if that VP of finance were to go ahead and go move on to something else, right? And we have a director now that takes that role, who then can replace that director, right? Which now hopefully you have like 3 to 6 different individuals there. So I think that's where you can go ahead and go start the future-proof organizations by having these conversations, and then also starting to look at like, where are my capability gaps? Where do we need to go in the future? What skills and capabilities? Everyone's talking about AI right now, right? Right? How do we start to go ahead and go inject AI capabilities to our current workforce, right? This way, it's not something that we're having to go ahead and go buy on the open market. Because as I'm sure as you could attest, like external talent is expensive, right? And I think also sometimes bringing in external talent more often than not can send the wrong message to your organization about the people that have been there for quite some time.
Yep. And so actually, I'd like to kind of double click onto that a little bit about, the talent pipeline or, sourcing talent from the outside. And when we're talking about succession planning and future proofing, please tell us a little bit about your vision and some of the things that you've seen in your experience with not just the senior level or the higher level executives, but actually creating these same sorts of plans for your entry level workforce and that sort of like that talent development mindset.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for giving me an opportunity here to talk to that. This is something I'm super passionate about. And this is actually where Intervoice Analytics really starts to come on into play. So I'll just talk super high level, my vision. My vision, and again, it's going to be a little bit theoretical, so bear with me for a moment. But my vision is once you join a company, I'd love to get to that point where you end up retiring with that company, kind of like that old school IBM model, right? As long as you're continuing to perform, you've got that job, right? And the reason why is we spend so much time acquiring talent, and it is expensive. Turnover is expensive, whether we like to realize it or not. Right. So that's part of what Intervoice Analytics does, is that we want to start to go ahead and go understand what is that employee sentiment within that organization. Some of the things that we hear often is lack of career pathing. Right. Well, like once we can kind of start to understand that a little bit better, we can go ahead and go start to focus our efforts on that career pathing. So I'll give you a quick example. In the hospital system that I was at, one of the things that we did is we sat there and we said, like, what if we took like an entry level food service? Like I'm working in the cafeteria when people are in the hospital, they're getting their food or they're making food for patients, right? Entry level food service, right? How could they go ahead and go get skills and capabilities where they could go ahead and go be an executive chef? We actually even mapped out paths and said, hey, you could be entry level. You could actually become a dietitian. Now, when you start to sit there and lay out that type of a vision of like entry level food service to dietitian, now you could take a step backwards as an organization and say, what barriers are in place for that individual to become a dietitian? Well, there could be some financial barriers, right? There could be some education barriers as along the way. So then you can start to problem solve that roadblock and say, all right, what investment could we make to go ahead and direct a lot of money towards entry-level food service individuals becoming a dietitian, right? Where we'll pay for your schooling, we'll pay for your credentialing, right? That's the type of offense that I would love for organizations to go ahead and go make. Now, it kind of goes back to what you and I just talked about at the beginning of this. Once you're super clear on what are those critical roles in your organization that you need in the future, then you can start having those conversations. Like if you knew critical role in the future is dietitian, then we kind of have that cascade effect that we just talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really like the fact that you mentioned that, and that's something that you're passionate about, because I've been fortunate enough to work for, a number of different companies where there has been that plan in place for, what's your next step? What's like that promotional ladder look like? And when an employee is in that situation, I feel like they're often more engaged. I feel like there's a higher level of I guess you would call it like stickiness to that employee. Like I think that they're a little more invested in what the organization is trying to do. And I like the fact that you're even dropping it down to that level of, the very entry level, the very kind of nuts and bolts of an organization, in a hospital or, in a medical office. When you look at it, patients interact with, the housekeeping staff, the cafeteria staff, the front office, and some of the back office clinical. And you spend more of your time with those individuals than you do with the actual, provider, so to speak. So the actual doctor or the surgeon. So, it's great that you have that mindset, that not to lose sight of sort of the people that are the boots on the ground. And so in your mind, as far as with what you do with Intervoice, what are some of the tactics or some of the things that you deploy as far as that organization is concerned to kind of tap into these things that you're talking about, as far as, just listening and figuring out your critical roles?
Yeah. So a couple things. Maybe I'll start picking with the listening side of it first here. We are actually bringing back the art of the conversation. And what I mean by that is the way we go ahead and go deploy, our solutions is we end up having 30-minute one-on-one conversations with people in the organization. So like if you were to bring in Intervoice Analytics, we would understand what are your goals, who are the people we need to talk about. And that's what ventures off into those 30-minute conversations. Now, the reason why those 30-minute conversations are so important is because that's when we go ahead and go get that insights, right? We have some incredibly gifted individuals that build credibility very, very quickly, where they can go ahead and go extract such great information. They make people feel at ease. And then that's when we start to identify, yeah, hey, look, people feel like that they're not being seen. They'd like to see leadership show up a little bit more. I think sometimes annual engagement surveys, they'll kind of come up with these results that say, oh, they want to hear from C-suite leaders more. So we need to have more communication from top down. That's not necessarily what people are looking for. And that's the stuff that that's what we're understanding, is that, hey, people that want to hear maybe just from their +1 manager, right? Not necessarily from the chief financial officer, right? So that's how we're actually unearthing a lot of like insight within an organization. Now, for organizations that are looking to kind of get started in terms of what are the critical roles in their business, I usually say there are a few questions you can kind of go ahead and go start to ask yourself and rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. One, if this role were to become vacant, would it cause an immediate impact to my business from a revenue, from a compliance standpoint? And you fill in the gaps in terms of what impact is to your business. So does it make an impact? Do we have any internal talent that could step into the role right away? Because if you do, maybe it's not as critical, but if you don't, I would kind of kick it up on another notch. 3, is external talent out there? Or is it expensive? Because I think that's another factor that kind of comes on into play as well. And also, is this a role that we're going to need in the future? So I think those 4 questions right off the bat can kind of help you gauge what roles are critical in your organization for not. And we usually keep it that simple just to start the dialogue. And Rick, the last thing I'll say on this is, I think the fact that leadership teams would start to have this conversation around critical roles just says get something on paper and you just continue to evolve it over time. And then you just get better at it. And it starts to become Nike was so dialed in terms of what their critical roles were. And the organization knew what those critical roles are, but they were also on that journey for quite some time as well.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of back to what we said before is like, you have to figure out what you want to do. And the first thing is take that first step. You have to just start and you will refine it as you go. There's nothing ever said you had to get it right the first time or even the second and third time. It's a process. So I think that really resonates. And I think that mentality of just continuing to improve and to get better is really the key here. And let's kind of shift gears also to something that I wanted to talk about as far as the idea of this succession planning and this future proofing your workforce and not being reactive. You know, in some ways, and I hope that you can kind of delve into this in a little more detail, but I feel like this sort of helps develop pipelines as well. And it can also be almost like a really good recruiting or retention tool if you kind of get these plans right.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And this is a great way to kind of start to identify all different types of pipelines. And I'm trying to think of like a quick example here for you, but let's just say, for example, that you have a director of sourcing in your organization. They're out there looking for different source spaces and manufacturing sites to develop product. That's what I mean by sourcing. What you could end up what you could start to figure out from a pipeline standpoint is a bunch of different feeder type roles into that. Maybe materials planning is a feeder into that role. Maybe, supply planning, demand planning could be feeders into that role. Inventory planning could be feeders into those roles. Because then once you have that type of concept, then you can kind of take that step back and say, who are we capturing to what young entry level talent are we having to come on in who are going to be our next inventory analysts, our materials analysts, our next supply planning analysis, analysts, et cetera, right? And then it just is kind of that cascade effect. And then once I know who those analysts are, how do I kind of give them the skills and capabilities or that investment that makes them attractive candidates for that next manager role, which then can lead into that director of sourcing that we were just used as an example. So I think this is just one of those things that it's almost like a subway map. If you really think about it with roles, right, is that there should be all these different intersection points, of people getting different skills, capabilities, experiences that make them these attractive candidates for these roles versus I had to go from sourcing analyst to sourcing manager to sourcing director. I mean, I think sometimes that works, but I think there are a lot of other creative ways that you could go ahead and train people along the way. I always bring it down to skill versus will. It's like super simple. Like if you have the will, then I can go ahead and go train the skill, right? Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to go ahead and go train and invest in the will.
Yep. Yeah. I use that all the time. And I say like, you can't teach grit, the skill versus will thing is very real and it resonates with a lot of people in this space as far as making decisions to bring somebody on board. You often hear like, I wonder if they're going to be a right fit for the culture or, they haven't had any experience doing this or, they don't really have a strong history in working in healthcare or, whatever manufacturing, whatever the industry is. But you said it best, Nick, like one thing that you can't teach is that willingness to learn and that willingness to be successful. And I think what you do at Intervoice is really important because, and I'd like you to talk about this a little bit, before we close is like, I'm sure that you've had conversations with some of your clients and some of the people that they serve with people that are being listened to, that are actually being surveyed and given a platform to voice what it is that they need or what they're looking for. They oftentimes, for different roles that are above and beyond what they're doing, simply just needed that conversation. They weren't even aware that something like that existed or they had the ability to do it or they lacked the confidence. So, I'm sure that you have tons of anecdotal evidence to speak to that.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a lot of what we see is, well, first, every time we have our little one-on-one conversations with individuals, we get, one, is this anonymous? And all of our conversations are anonymous, number one, because they don't trust that anonymity sometimes, right? Where they are holding back. And I think that's what a lot of leaders are starting to see is that by having that neutral third party, it's almost like a therapy session for individuals, for us to go ahead and take that burden off of an employee, package it up in a manner where we protect the innocent, and then boil these themes up to leaders and sit there and say, look, here are your issues right now. They're not feeling that leadership is visible, the right leadership. They don't have any confidence in blah, 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 or they don't feel confident in career pathing. Those are pretty much some of the things that we typically see all the time. And again, I give organizations credit. They are trying, right, with their traditional tools that they're having. The issue that we're trying to help with and supplement is engagement survey data tends to kind of remain flat. And we start to celebrate, hey, we went from 64% to 66%. Is that something really to go ahead and go celebrate, right? At 2%, I mean, like back to school, that's a D, right? I don't know if I'm happy with a D. So there's something wrong in that measurement system. You're not getting that employee sentiment. So that's what we're working on trying to unearth for organizations, that true employee sentiment.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that is something that every organization could benefit from. And I don't think that any organization is immune from, the environment that's out there in the workforce and all the other factors that are at play. So, I think that we would both agree that the biggest thing that one can do is just to start the process to figure out what are your critical roles. Like, what are some of the things that you can't live without? Listen to your employees, start that process. And so, I think that there's a lot to kind of double click into. And I think that, we should definitely have another conversation here and kind of do like a part 2 of this interview and just talk a little bit about, some of those other things out there, some of the other elements that these companies are facing out there as far as the workforce. So
yeah, I would love that opportunity. That'd be great.
Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation, Nick. And, I mean, if I'll give you an opportunity to offer, some information about yourself and Intervoice. So if you would like to tell the audience of how they can get a hold of you and some information about Intervoice and ways that they can engage you, I'll give you that platform. And then until we meet again, I really enjoyed our time on Talent Talk today.
Yeah, no, Rick, I appreciate the whole dialogue here as well. And I would love to go ahead and go continue it. And thanks for the opportunity here. Very simply, you can reach me at nick@intervoiceanalytics.com. You can go to our website, intervoiceanalytics.com. There's a free assessment that you can go ahead and go take that does a nice job gauging in terms of how does your continuous employee listening strategy work currently. We don't collect emails. We don't collect scores. It is truly one of those interactive tools that is just there to benefit you in some capacity. Rick, I really appreciate chatting with you here today.
Yep. Great. Thanks so much, Nick. I appreciate it. And then we'll try to get us a part 2 scheduled. I really appreciate our conversation.
Great.